welcome back to the program. He is a knucklehead. He wears his emotion on his sleeves, and everybody knows him. Tim Walz, when he's lying. But there's more to the pudgy, dumb, Midwestern folksy dad. He also wants to get rid of the Electoral College. He was asked about this by ABC's Michael Strahan.
I want to go back to something you said on Tuesday. You said, I think all of us know the Electoral College needs to go. But the campaign came out later that night, and they said that's not their stance.
Yeah. Well, it's not the campaign's position. And the point I'm trying to make is that there's folks that feel every vote must count in every state. Mm-hmm. And I think some of folks feel that's not the case. Our campaign does that. And the point I'm saying is I'm in 5 states in 2 days. We're out there making the case that the campaign's position is clear, that that's not their position. Their position and my position is to make sure that everybody understands their vote, no matter what state they're in, matters.
So that's something that you and Vice President Harris disagree on?
I have spoken about it in the past, that she's been very clear on this, and the campaign, and my position is the campaign's position.
All right, joining me now to discuss Tim Walz's statement about wanting to do away with the Electoral College to benefit the Democratic Party is campus reform higher education fellow and professor of political science at Suffolk Community College here in New York, Nicholas Giordano. Nicholas, welcome back to the program.
Thank you for having me.
This one's really important, right? I'm the aw shucks Midwestern dad who just loved being a teacher. I mean, I went to China 30 times and I lied about my military service and I wasn't really there for Tiananmen Square. This is something the Democrats are seriously pushing. They'll say that the Electoral College is decidedly undemocratic, and you know what? I agree, and that's by design.
Well, that's a great point. I mean, the reality is the Electoral College is a result of the compromise at the Constitutional Convention, that the idea that the Founding Fathers did not want the popular vote. And there's a reason behind it. People tend to forget when you hear POTUS, everyone thinks President of the United States, but it's really President of these United States, that the states are united in selecting a president that's going to represent us as a whole. It's not President of these United Cities. And that's what would happen if you did away with the Electoral College. It would really be the cities that would have all the power over the states, and you would render the system completely destroyed. That's not the intent the Founding Fathers had, where you could ignore what the majority of states want. The winner of the Electoral College actually wins the majority of the states. And when we go to the polls, we're technically voting for a slate of electors. The real presidential election happens in December on the first Monday following the second Wednesday of the month, according to our Constitution. And that's the most important thing, because we look at the Electoral College and it's designed so that everyone has a say, but it doesn't mean that you just get your way. And people want to undo it for political purposes, and I think that's dangerous.
Look, it's pretty safe because you're not going to get 38 states to join 2/3 of the House and 2/3 of the Senate. But they want 5 to 8 major metropolitan cities to basically rule the whole population. The Electoral College spreads the power out and gives voice to rural populations. And to see if I could dazzle you a little bit, we actually had 2 electoral colleges in the Constitution. Prior to the 17th Amendment, the senators were appointed. So you'd vote for your state legislative body, who would then meet, and they would select the senators that would go represent them, giving them a 6-year term. Now, if they wanted, really be honest, we should have 2-year terms or go back to appointments. But that appointment was, in essence, a second electoral college.
It was, and it was critically important. I don't think people really focus on the 17th Amendment all that much. So I'm actually glad that you brought it up, because the idea behind the Senate is that the Senate represents what's in the best interest of the state, not what's in the best interest of the people. Our education system has done a horrible job at teaching students the history of our nation, but the roles and responsibilities of our institutions. We keep hearing about threats to democracy. We are not a democracy. We are a constitutional republic. The Founding Fathers abhorred democracy. The House of Representatives, that represents the people. That's where the will of the people is supposed to prevail. Then you have the Senate that represents the states and does what's in the best interests of the states. Then you have a president that's supposed to do what's in the best interests of the United States as a whole and the 350 million people that are living here. And ever since the 17th Amendment, well, we've seen the Senate capitulate to the people's demands that may not be in the interests of their particular states. But what really gets me is if you start to talk about undoing the Electoral College, you start to talk about undoing things like the filibuster that's been in place since 1806. Then you hear talk about packing the Supreme Court. You hear talk about adding Washington, D.C. and Puerto Rico as states. And then finally, you have some, including Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, that says the Senate must be a more representative institution, that California should not have as much power as Wyoming. California is a much bigger state with a much larger population. And so Wyoming should be subservient to California. It's a really dangerous road that we're going down where they want to do basically every part of our United States Constitution.
The framers understood the mobocracy, right? They put checks and balances in place so no one faction, no one person, no one region can run away with absolute power and create servitude for everyone else. They want to get rid of that because they think that mobocracy, that packed court, that apportioned Senate would give them all the power they need. And then they lecture us about fascism and dictators and tyranny and all these other things. The phrase tyranny of the majority means something, that not every aspect of our lives is subject to a vote of 51% of our neighbors.
It does mean something. The tyranny of the majority, the founding fathers warned that majorities are wrong. They can be wrong. And majorities have been responsible for some really bad things throughout history, including genocide. And so we have to be careful with this idea that it's all about majority rule, because that does equal mob rule. And people join majorities, even if they don't support them or believe in them, because they don't want to be isolated and targeted by the majority. So it's a dangerous road to go down when you start to undo all the fabric. And I encourage everyone to start reading the Federalist Papers. You know, I'm teaching my students right now, Federalist 10 and the idea of factions. And none of my students even heard of the Federalist Papers until they got to my class. They've been in school for 13 years now. They're in college now. And so they have at least 13 years of education behind them. And the fact that they never read the Federalist Papers and the warnings about the tyranny of the majority, it's a little disheartening. And we have to do a better job educating Americans on the proper role of our institutions, and that there's an idea behind self-government and limited government. Our founding fathers understood that if you grant all this power to the government, it's only a matter of time before it becomes authoritarian, and we are seeing elements of that creep in.
Yeah. Well, look, we're going to run out of time, but, you know, look, they're talking. We should address it. Thankfully, we know that to get rid of the Electoral College, to apportion the Senate, would require massive movements of amendments. Now, in the elongated clip that Strahan was referring to, he talks about those things as well, also being decidedly undemocratic. But, you know, you would have to convince 2/3 of the House, 2/3 of the Senate, and say to states like Wyoming, hey, give up your voice in the executive branch, at least for the time being. I think the Constitution is safe. They're not going to be able to get amendments through, and they're certainly not going to be able to call an Article 5 convention. Nicholas Giordano, thanks for joining us. Have a great weekend.
Always a pleasure to be with you.